Hey guys, we are back this week at Legacy, the artist behind the legends. And this week on the podcast for episode 5, we are covering the life of C.S. Lewis. Also, I'm literally trying to brighten up my study with a candle right now because I just have limited lighting options and it's just a dark and kind of dreary day out. So it's been really hard to try and figure out the lighting situation in here with just the sound, black drapes and everything. But hopefully this will help a little bit. It looks great behind me, but apparently there's just no light in this little corner. So anyway, I missed you guys. I'm so happy to be back this week. Thank you for allowing me the personal time to grieve the loss of my Basset Hound. We lost her about 3 weeks ago. It's been really tough, but we're getting through it. If you guys have listened to the podcast or know anything about me or follow me on social media, you know how much I love that dog. So it's been a tough couple weeks, but we're getting through it. And in the meantime, I'm just happy to be back to work. I'm happy to be back behind the microphone. I'm just, work tends to be something that helps us distract from these type of things. So I'm happy to be back and looking forward to this week. So let's get rolling with C.S. Lewis on episode 5, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Clive Staples Lewis, or as he was later called, Jack, was an Irish-born novelist, poet, essayist, academic, medievalist, literary critic, lay theologian, broadcaster, lecturer, and Christian apologist active during the 20th century, and he is probably best known for his series The Chronicles of Narnia. Lewis's immense career saw him publish around 40 books, which have been translated into over 36 languages and have sold millions of copies worldwide. But as all of you know, it isn't the literary works we tackle on this podcast, it's the artist. And Jack was definitely one hell of a fascinating character. While he was a notable and extremely popular Christian apologist, this only came later in his life, as he was a staunch atheist from his adolescence until his early 30s. Yeah, no shit. And while the majority of Lewis's adult life was spent teaching at his alma mater, Oxford, he did for a time hold the position at Cambridge, and this aspect of his professional career is just often overshadowed by his novels. Jack also carried on a long-standing love affair with one of his best friend's mothers, fought in World War I, was best friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, as well as a renowned member of the Inklings, and on top of all that, he saw his death overshadowed as President JFK was shot less than an hour after Lewis's death. Whew. Mr. Lewis was a lover of beer, a smoker of cigarettes, and above all, he loved a good story. So let's get episode 5 of Legacy rolling and dive into the life of none other than C.S. Lewis. I'm Whiskey Emerson, and you're listening to Legacy. Happy Friday, everybody. It's Whiskey Emerson here, and we are back this week after a brief kind of 2-week hiatus there. And for episode 5, we are covering the life of C.S. Lewis. I'm so excited about that. I want to formally apologize to everyone for the just unmarked absence here. I know I posted a couple things in social media letting everybody know, but I have been absent because, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, I lost my Basset Hound, who was my best friend. She was not even 4 years old. She's basically my companion. And I lost her in a freak accident where she, unfortunately, herniated a disc in her back that basically rendered her paralyzed in her legs and in her lower abdomen. A life that would have been miserable for her, an extremely painful surgery, and, she wouldn't have been able to even use the bathroom by herself. So, sadly, my husband and I were forced to make the decision to let her rest in peace after such an accident, and it's been devastating, to say the least. I know a lot of people love their dogs and think of them as children. I'm definitely one of those people. That dog was my life. She spent every day with me, and most of you also know I work from home. I'm an author, I'm a podcaster, and I also am a digital nomad where I have a separate job where I get to work from home and do that. And so she was my constant buddy. We traveled 2 times back and forth across this country, moving around. She would hike with us. She would camp with us. She would just hang out and she's basically been with me through most of writing West of Hell as well, which is my novel that came out last year. So it's been challenging, but we're getting through it. And I just want to thank you guys. I mean, I've had people reach out to me and check on us that love the podcast, or even just that have loved West of Hell and follow my work. And thank you so much for that. It means the world to me. I can't tell you how much support is needed in times like that. So thank you all. And now that we're kind of getting back on track here, I'm so happy to be back behind this microphone. It's a great thing to have work as a motivating factor and just as a distraction when times are tough. And so I've got a couple of fun things coming up ahead that I'm excited to announce. And first up is that, one, I'm going to be heading to Hawaii in a couple weeks, which I cannot wait for. A little vacation is definitely needed right now. But the following week on July 5th, I will be hosting an event with Rogue Ales and Spirits here in Portland at their Flanders pub location. I will be their sponsored artist that they will basically set up a booth. I'll be signing copies of West of Hell. There's beer, great pub food, live music, and we're going to have just basically kind of a special whiskey tasting to go along with the book signing, obviously. So anyway, I hope you guys are, or my Portlandians at least, are up for that. And the following weekend on July 7th and 8th, which is a Saturday and Sunday, I am going to be a vendor at GearCon. And if you don't know what GearCon is, it is a steampunk festival here in Portland. If you don't know what steampunk is, think 19th century science fiction, like the brass goggle type of look that you see a lot of people rocking, that type of thing. So I'm pretty excited because I get to dress up like one of my characters from my novel, which will be amazing, and just get to hang out and people watch all weekend. And I'll be there signing books. I'll basically set up my vending station to look a little bit like the madam's rooms in the palace. If you guys have read my novel, you know what I'm talking about. If not, you can find my book on Amazon. It's called West of Hell. It is up there. It's got great reviews. I promise you will not regret it. So let's move on then, shall we? And get this episode going. So the drink of the week this week is the Lion's Tail. Now, okay, I'm just going to say this. I picked the Lion's Tail because I was thinking The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And C.S. Lewis loved beer. He's just like Tolkien. Those guys would sit in the pub and just fucking drink beer for hours. There's even like all this speculation that C.S. Lewis would drink in the morning time. It was never like to get drunk. He'd just like have a beer with breakfast. It's super weird. But anyway, so this is the drink of the week. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm sitting here drinking a gin and tonic because it's summer and it's like weirdly warm and humid out right now. And also I didn't have two of the ingredients on the ingredients list. So I was just kind of shit out of luck here. But if you're up for making the cocktail of the week, I got it here for you. And I've had it before. It's really, really good. Also, you can sub for a pint of your favorite beer. That seems like a very inkling and very C.S. Lewis thing to do as well. So I will also opt in for that as a substitute. But the Lion's Tail. Ingredients. You have 2 ounces of bourbon, half an ounce of lime juice, half an ounce of allspice dram, what I didn't have, a teaspoon of simple syrup, and a dash of Angostura bitters. I actually broke our bottle of Angostura bitters last weekend, so unfortunately we were out of those too. And you just really can't sub both those things together. So the instructions are super basic. Just combine everything in a large shaker filled with ice, get a stir well, and then strain into a martini glass and garnish with lime. Simple. Go for a beer, though, if you want. I mean, I'm cheating and having a gin and tonic, but I figured you guys would give me a pass considering it's my first week back and, Anyway. So, C.S. Lewis, best known works. The Chronicles of Narnia, the Screwtape Letters, and the Space Trilogy. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this podcast knows what the Chronicles of Narnia are. Screwtape Letters, possibly. The Space Trilogy, a little less possible. But they're all incredible. They're definitely the works that set C.S. Lewis on the map. So, C.S. Lewis was born the youngest of two boys in Belfast, Ireland, on November 29th. I just realized I have a typo here. On November 29th of 1898. I had 1989. Wow, would that be different? And this was to parents Albert James Lewis and Florence Augusta Lewis. So something funny, this is a fact that a lot of people misinterpret here, but a lot of times C.S. Lewis is noted as being British because he did spend a lot of his life in Britain, but he was Irish, and he really, really rigidly stuck with his Irish identity. When he first got to England and to Britain, he was not a fan, and he actively sought out his other fellow Irishmen throughout his life, just, getting to know them and befriending them while he lived in Britain, which I think is kind of funny and awesome. But anyway, back to it. So his father was a solicitor in Ireland after his own family migrated over in the mid-19th century. And Lewis's mother, Florence, was a highly educated woman who came from a relatively religious family. Her father was actually a priest. Now, I say highly educated because Florence actually graduated from the University of Belfast during a time when it was not commonplace for a woman to earn a degree or to go to college. So she was a fucking badass to start. So both the Lewis parents were keen readers, and they made an effort to highly educate their children, starting at a young age. It's rumored, actually, that Jack could read at age 3 and he was writing by age 4, which, if that's the case, wow, kudos to those parents. So Jack's older brother, Warren, was one of his closest friends throughout his life, and he went by the nickname Warnie, which I love. Now, where does the nickname of Jack come from for C.S. Lewis? Well, it originated when Lewis was about 4 years old, and his dog Jaxie was hit and killed by a car. Resonates with me this week. Ugh. So for a time, he insisted on only being called Jaxie. And as that, started to fade out, his close friends and family held on to the nickname, and thus Clive Staples became Jack. So I will be referring to C.S. Lewis as Jack throughout most of this, Jack and Lewis, as I usually do. So if you get a little lost, I'm sorry. It's just, I feel like he's my friend after this week, so I'm just going to refer to him as Jack. So Jack later described himself in childhood as, quote, a product of long corridors, empty sunlit rooms, upstairs indoor silences, attics explored in solitude, distant noises of gurgling cisterns and pipes, and the noise of wind under the tiles. Also, endless books, end quote. Sounds like a great childhood to me. As a boy, Jack was a huge fan of anthropomorphic animals, and as you can probably imagine, fell in love with Beatrix Potter's stories. So it's such a mouthful. Anthropomorphic basically means like walking, talking, dressed like human animals. So he got into the habit of writing his own stories, just kind of in a similar fashion to Beatrix herself. And he would throw in a dash of like chivalry and medievalism because he really liked Arthurian culture and legend. And he and Warnie would put together illustrated collections of these animal adventures in a chronicle they entitled Boxen. The Lewises also made sure to attend church every Sunday. And while Jack grew up in a pretty strict religious household, he himself did not feel particularly pious or devout. And that's noted in a lot of his memoirs, is that he was forced to go to church, and like most young boys, he just was kind of like, whatever. And, I'm sure his very, very devout mother and super religious father absolutely loved that. So until the age of 9, Jack was schooled by private tutors, and upon the death of his mother in 1908 from cancer, Albert sent his son to study at Wynyard School. I think that's how you say it, Wynyard School, where Warnie had already been for about 3 years. This marked a very sudden and drastic change for both Jack and Warnie. The two of them began to rely heavily on each other, and their relationship with their father became really, really strained, and it remained that way until his death. C.S. Lewis described the time after his mother's death as all settled happiness, all that was tranquil and reliable disappeared from my life. Ooh, brutal. So Jack's time at the school was a total nightmare. The headmaster was a man named Robert Oldie Capron, and he was an intensely cruel man who would flog the boys with little provocation. Lessons were basically a drill time for students with very little actual educational guidance. And no shit, the school was closed down shortly after Jack's arrival due to a lack of pupils. And also, no shit, not long after, Robert Capron was committed to a psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life. What the fuck? This guy was insane. He literally was insane. And he was beating students, and no wonder the school failed. So anyway, I had to throw that in there just because I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Eventually, after a brief stint at a more local school and then a temporary absence because of a respiratory illness, Jack was sent to the Cherbourg House in Malvern, Worcestershire. I think that's how you say it. I'm so bad with these English pronunciations. And this was a prep school that saw him basically abandon his Christianity, and he wholeheartedly became an atheist, though this has to do with his expanding education rather than any particularly negative experience. Jack fell in love with the music of Richard Wagner, and also with Norse mythology and just northernness in general, which, hell yes. If you know, I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast too much yet, but I am a diehard Norse mythology gal myself. And basically, Jack got into the Scandinavian Icelandic sagas, of which I own all of them. So if you guys ever want to rent it out from my library, I have all of them, and they're amazing. I highly recommend reading it. Also, Neil Gaiman has a wonderful Norse mythology book out. It's kind of for beginners, so go for it, dive in. Anyway, in September of 1913, Jack went on to secondary school at Malvern College, where he stayed until June of 1914. So basically just one school year. Lewis strongly disliked Malvern. It was extremely competitive, and a group of older boys more or less ran the school, and they would bully the younger ones, and they actually would spread rumors about homosexual relationships between students, which really upset Jack. He just didn't want to be involved in any of that. So, hold on here, guys. Sorry, we had a brief technical error. I had one of those things pop up that said error, and it looked like it had stopped recording, but it didn't. We're cool. Anyway, so Lewis was not cool with this. It really upset him, and he kept himself as much as possible just to avoid trouble and just to avoid these boys and just the bullshit that was going on, with them bullying these younger kids. So as soon as possible, he left Malvern, which was at the end of that school year. So once he escaped, Jack went on to study privately with William T. Kirkpatrick. And Kirkpatrick was his father's old tutor and former headmaster of a school called Lurgan College. He lived in Surrey, Lewis lived in Surrey with the Kirkpatricks, and he loved every second of it. He actually called his tutor the Great Knock. And by knock, I mean knock. Kirkpatrick was an imposing man who constantly wore his gardening clothes, even when he wasn't out gardening, which I kind of think is funny. And he instilled in Lewis a love of Greek literature and mythology. He helped him fine-tune his debating skills, and as well as study Greek and Latin and master Greek and Latin. Jack additionally provided a routine to his life that he would basically follow from that day forward. And this was that he would get up at 7:30 in the morning and go for an early walk, breakfast at 8, work from 9:15 until lunch at 1, freedom during the early afternoon until tea at 4:15, work from 5 until 9, interrupted by dinner at 7. After 9, Lewis could write independently, whether that be stories, lyric poetry, or whatever he was, enthralled by at the time, which sounds like an amazing schedule to me. Seriously. In 1916, Jack received a scholarship and attended University College at Oxford. Yet, as you know, this is right around the time of the First World War. As an Irishman, Lewis was not required to serve in the army, but he did so anyhow, wanting to do his part. He was commissioned after training into the 3rd Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry of the British Army as a 2nd lieutenant. And on his 19th birthday, Jack arrived on the front lines in Somme Valley, France. Oh my God, can you imagine? I cannot. His experience in the war was horrific, as it was for most men sent into the trenches on the front lines of France. And the death and destruction he saw only fueled the atheism he felt at that time. He did, however, form a friendship that changed the course of his life. He met a young Irishman named Edward Moore, and the two of them made a pact that if either of them did not make it home, the other would support his family. Moore, unfortunately, did not survive, and in 1918, Lewis was sent home with shrapnel wounds and demobilized from the army, which actually allowed him to resume his studies at Oxford and permanently just separated him from the British Army. Once home, Lewis did keep his promise to Edward, and he took care of Edward's sister Maureen and his mother Janie. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to the depth of the relationship between Janie and Lewis. There's a 27-year age gap, and Lewis made sure to be extremely private about the nature of their relationship, though Maureen, many years later, believed the two of them were romantically involved and having an affair for a number of years. Now, what we do know is that Lewis perceived her as a maternal figure, and he would often refer to her as his mother, and they had just a deeply affectionate connection. And, that's weird and ew if they were doing it. Seriously, that makes me think mom complex or something. And I take that back to maybe because he lost his mom at a young age and he was attached to her. I don't know, but that's just fucking weird. So throughout his years finishing his schooling at Oxford, the Moores and Jack stayed in a series of rented houses. And while there seemed to be kind of a constant worry about money, the three of them managed to get along just fine without any serious financial difficulties. Then around 1930, Jack and Warnie inherited a little bit of extra money upon the death of their father, Albert, and thus the two of them, along with Mrs. Moore, bought a residence they called the Kilns. It was on the outskirts of Oxford, and Jack, Warnie, Maureen, and Janie lived there together until Maureen eventually married. Then it was just the three of them. It was Janie and Warnie and Jack. But, okay, so back up just a little bit, because I want to talk just a tad about Lewis on a professional scale, because he was killing it at Oxford. He received a first in honor moderations, which is basically Greek and Latin literature, in 1920. He received a first in greats, which is philosophy and ancient history, in 1922, and a first in English in 1923. In 1924, he became a philosophy tutor at University College, and then subsequently in 1925, he was elected a fellow and tutor in English literature at Magdalen College, where he served for 29 years until 1954. Hell yeah, dude knew his shit. So at Oxford, Lewis met Owen Barfield, who he became fast friends with, and Owen is the one who actually formed the literary discussion group we all know and love, the Inklings. The group would meet throughout the 1930s at a pub called the Eagle and the Child. They called it the Bird and the Baby, which I think is great. Hold on, I haven't been drinking my drink. I need to catch up here. And this group included, obviously, C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Adam Fox, Hugo Dyson, Charles Williams, and Lewis's brother, Warnie, actually was a member of the Inklings. The purpose behind their group was to hear and to critique members' writings and progress, and, it was the first place that some of Lewis's own stories came about, and obviously, as we all know, it was where Tolkien really first just kind of threw out his ideas for Lord of the Rings as well. It's incredible. I mean, these literary-minded people who just sit down at night and they would just shoot the shit and brainstorm the ideas they had for writing books. It's so amazing. Oddly enough, it was this group that aided in pushing Lewis back to Christianity, though it was by no means an instantaneous occurrence. So there have been a lot of little things that had happened here and there, none of them super, super notable, but there's two that I want to bring up that happened within a close time span that pretty much signaled the transfer of Lewis from atheism back to Christianity. So on September 19th of 1931, Lewis, Dyson, and Tolkien took an evening stroll that was the eventual catalyst for Lewis's conversion. They discussed myth, Christianity, scripture, Christ's resurrection, you name it. And apparently, each one of Jack's arguments was just shot down and overrun by both Tolkien and Dyson. And it actually made him start to believe he was wrong about turning his back on God. His final commitment to turning back to Christianity took place about 3 days after that. And Jack was basically traveling by motorcycle with Warnie to the zoo. And he said this, quote, "When we set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And when we reached the zoo, I did." And, I'm sure it was just like that, moment where he had that epiphany. But otherwise, that must have been one hell of a motorcycle ride. That's all I'm saying. And I ride motorcycles, and, I could see it. But, I just thought that was funny. The later part of the 1930s marks the beginning of Lewis's novel writing, starting with his take on science fiction and expanding into Christian apologetics, which eventually led to Narnia. Warnie was his go-to man. He sounds like the best brother ever, to be honest. And he assisted in typing Lewis's handwritten manuscripts and just basically being his secretary and personal assistant. So briefly, I just want to highlight, the three that I kind of brought up in the beginning, because these are the household names for C.S. Lewis. So actually, his first successful work of fiction was Out of the Silent Planet, published in 1938. And this was a novel in which Lewis wove Christian allusions and themes into science fiction. Fascinating. And this was followed by the sequel, Perelandra, and then made into a trilogy with That Hideous Strength. This series was one of the earliest and one of the best science fiction trilogies, and it was widely, widely popular. So next up, in 1942, he produced the Screwtape Letters, which was a work of, it was like a work of fiction that consisted of 31 letters in which an elderly, experienced devil named Screwtape instructs his junior, Wormwood, in the subtle art of tempting a young Christian convert. This was a bestseller in Britain and the US. It sold out everywhere. It was crazy. And then the 1950s brought Narnia. We all know and love Narnia. If you don't, you're missing out. That's all I'm saying. And you should definitely start reading them as soon as possible. This was a children's fantasy series consisting of 7 novels which describe the conflict between good and evil that occurs in the kingdom of Narnia. And wow, they're amazing. So, the Second World War, so backing up from the timeline just a hair, the Second World War came around and Warnie went back into the army because he technically was still in, whereas Lewis joined the Home Guard. And Lewis actually, this is amazing, he housed evacuees of London at the kilns. Basically, like, when London was getting dive bombed, they would just, he would assist in getting people out of the city, and he would house people at his residence because they would have nowhere else to go. What a badass thing to do. From 1941 to 1943, Lewis gave a series of talks about Christianity on BBC Radio, and these talks brought about a sense of just inspiration to downtrodden troops and civilians. The war was just, it was really just, it was a dark and dreary time for everybody that was participating because it didn't seem like winning and victory were in the grasp of the Allies at that point. And his talks actually brought about conversions of listeners. That's how inspirational they were, and they helped add fuel to the fire for a lot of despairing soldiers and despairing civilians who then again would turn back to God and rely on God. These by the way, these lectures that he gave on BBC were later published in Mere Christianity, which is a book that I don't know if it's strictly those, but it definitely deals with a lot of his Christian writings. So Lewis lived with and cared for Janie until she was hospitalized in the late 1940s. She suffered from dementia and was put into a nursing home where she died in 1951. That didn't stop Jack, though. He visited her every day at the nursing home until her death. Talk about dedication to another human being. So now that Jack was basically single, 1952 brought a new and special lady into his life, a woman named Joy Gresham, who had actually been corresponding with Lewis for almost 2 years before they met. And the reason actually they had started talking is because she was a recent convert to Christianity after hearing his BBC series. So She came to visit in England for a short period of time and went home to find her husband cheating on her. Ah, so lovely. He had already been abusive. He was noted as being an alcoholic and just being irrational, crazy with money. So I think it was just kind of final straw for her, which, heck yes, it should have been. So Joy took her 2 sons, and they moved to England into a house not far from the Kilns. Joy was a New York teacher of English literature and a recent convert to Christianity, like I previously mentioned. She was often described as sharp, outspoken, and very witty, my kind of gal, and also apparently C.S. Lewis's kind of gal. In 1954, her husband divorced her, and in 1956, with her work permit expired, Lewis decided to marry Joy so she wouldn't have to move back to America. It was not really a romantic thing. I don't really know if they were romantically involved. I think they were just attached to each other at this point. So it was a simple civil ceremony in a registry office done just for legal matters. That was it. Now, 1954 was also an important year for Lewis. He accepted a new role as the chair of medieval and Renaissance literature at Magdalene College at Cambridge, which is where he would finish his career. So he basically left Oxford for the opportunity to run this department. This did not detach him from Oxford. He kept his house at the Kilns, and while he stayed at Cambridge during the week, he spent every weekend back at home with Warne Joy and her boys. Sadly, not long after they got married in 1956, Joy was diagnosed with advanced cancer. And Lewis apparently realized he was in love with her at this point, and he made their marriage public, having a small ceremony performed while she was still in her hospital bed. And when Joy was released from the hospital, she and her 2 sons moved into the Kilns. For a time, her health improved, but it wouldn't last. Joy's cancer came back in 1960 and took her life that July. The grief that followed for Jack tested his attachment to religion, but regardless, his faith did persevere. And he wrote about it a lot, and I think it was one of the first times when a very notable writer went public with his grief in such and also with his test of his Christianity in such a public way. And a lot of those writings were noted to really, really help other people dealing with that. Scratch my throat, sorry guys. So the following summer in 1961, Lewis started to suffer from nephritis, which resulted in blood poisoning, and he took a leave of absence from Cambridge to ease his health until the next spring, when he returned to work. The next year, Lewis's health drastically improved until July 15th of 1963, when he suffered a heart attack and nearly died. He resigned from Cambridge and retired to the Kilns, and by November, he was diagnosed with end-stage renal failure. He died on November 22nd, just a week shy of his 65th birthday. So, conclusion. While Jack may have lived a relatively quiet life, there are definitely some quirks that stand out. I mean, his transfer of hardcore atheism to devout Christianity, his odd love of a woman nearly 30 years older than him, or simply the idea that almost every work of fiction he wrote is laced with Christian undertones. I mean, all of that is just kind of odd yet fascinating at the same time. Clearly, Lewis was so impacted by his faith that he sought to try and bring that faith to as many people as he could, even if that meant concocting a completely separate world of stories to do so. I have to admire him for that, because it is no simple feat. Jack saw 2 world wars. He spent his life educating young minds and dedicating himself to those he cared about, no matter the toll it took on him personally. He was a simple and yet so very complex man at the same time. So, cheers to you, Mr. Lewis, and thank you for making me love science fiction, and we'll get to that in just a second, but cheers to you, C.S. Lewis. Now, Whiskey's recommendations. I recommend the Space Trilogy. It was actually, I had read Narnia, obviously, as a child, but the Space Trilogy I read in my teenage years, and good God, it's awesome. Now, the third one I could do without, to be honest. It gets a little too preachy for me, but the first two are amazing. I highly recommend it, especially Out of the Silent Planet. It's one of the best science fiction books ever. So I highly recommend that. Now, there are Narnia movies. I think there's a new one coming out like next year too, but they're not very good. So I'm not going to recommend any of that because I don't think it's worth it. The books are so amazing and they're really not super dense reads. So I highly recommend just going for the book in this case. Now, episode 6 next week. We are going to cover the life of American writer Kurt Vonnegut. This is a man whose career spanned over 5 decades, producing 14 novels, 3 short story collections, 5 plays, and 5 works of nonfiction. Vonnegut is probably best known for the book Slaughterhouse-Five, published in 1969, turning his prisoner of war experience in World War II into a worldwide sensation. His life is riddled with random twists and turns of fate, and while Kurt might have died in 2007, so not that long ago, he still has over 200,000 Twitter followers, and he makes sure to yell at them multiple times a day. My favorite fact about Mr. Vonnegut is that this man loved watching the television show Cheers. Of all the fucking thing. Like, Cheers. So I guess we all have our guilty pleasures, is what I'm getting at. Tune in next week to hear all about this literary legend in episode 6 of Legacy, and I'm so looking forward to this. I've been wanting to cover Vonnegut for a while, and I'm so happy that finally diving right in to do it. So I hope everybody loved learning about C.S. Lewis, aka Jack, this week. I had a great time learning about him. The weird mom relationship thing kind of made my stomach turn a little, but who knows what went on there, and I'm not going to judge anybody whose shoes I have not walked at. So I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend. Oh, I did want to make one quick announcement here too. So before I started this season, I started a Patreon page, and I am actually going to discontinue that. And I wanted to thank the people who did originally back me. There's a lot of reasons why. I've gotten a few supporters, not too many. I've gotten a few though, and it really was the last 2 weeks after losing Jolene and dealing with a lot of grief and evaluating my life in different ways. I think I just started to realize that type of a thing is not why I do this. I do this because I fucking love it, because I like educating myself, because I like throwing this type of shit out into the abyss and educating people if I can, but mainly just entertaining. I mean, I want to entertain you. I want to educate you. I want to hang out with you. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I've started doing the YouTube videos, which, hi everybody on YouTube. But anyway, I'm going to discontinue the Patreon page. Thank you to the people that did back me. Love you guys, but I am here because I love it, not for any other reason. And so that's why I'm going to do that. So anyway, like I said, have a kick-ass weekend. Episode 6 with Vonnegut next week. I cannot wait. And cheers, everybody. I'll see you soon. Whew. Well, there we go with episode 5. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's so good to be back doing this. I really, really missed it. It's amazing how even after a couple of weeks, I'm just so ready to dive back into podcasting. But I hope you guys enjoyed C.S. Lewis. I'm really looking forward to Vonnegut. And yeah, have a great, great, great weekend. And I'll see you next week. Cheers.